We've done videos about the Canon 5D series, the Sony A7 series. Today, because of the announcement of the X100V very recently, we're going to go through the Fujifilm X100 series of cameras because it's Throwback Thursday. Welcome back to Throwback Thursday, where we take a slightly closer look at some of the more interesting items in our ever-growing park cameras used department. Now today, you can't actually see them in the shop, but I've got all four of the X100 cameras prior to the X100V, which of course we've done a video about. You can go and see that on our YouTube channel. In fact, I'll pop a link in the description so you can go check out that whole video review, because that's a really awesome camera. But of course, Throwback Thursday, we're going to take a look at the series where it all kind of began, starting of course with the X100, moving through the X100S, the T, and of course the F. All lovely cameras in their own right. Let's talk about what makes them unique. So of course, let's start with the X100. Now this is a really nice camera, and it's the kind of camera that's perfect for anyone starting out properly in photography. So let's say maybe a student doing a course in photography, maybe wants to get a camera like this. It'd be lovely starting camera. Someone who wants to get into photography more seriously. Of course, it's a 12.3 megapixel APS-C sensor with a 23mm fixed lens on the front, which gives you, because it's an APS-C sensor, gives you the equivalent of a 35mm lens. I think it's still a great looking camera. I think Fujifilm have that timeless look to their cameras, so they kind of blend the new and the old, and it just looks fantastic, you know, but it looks like a film camera. Of course, it has that hybrid optical electronic viewfinder, which you'll find across the entire X100 range, but it's still pretty rare outside of a few cameras. So obviously there's the X100, there's the X Pro cameras, which have the hybrid viewfinder, but it's a really interesting way of taking photos, and it feels really nice, you know, it feels like a fun way of taking photos. It makes it feel like a film camera, and like I say, it's a lot of fun to shoot with. Now the image quality on this camera actually still, I think, is really nice. You know, it holds up. Obviously the others are gonna be a little bit better, and there's improvements there which we'll go through, but to be honest, you can get some really nice images out of this camera. The 12 megapixels is enough to get reasonable levels of detail, you know, certainly enough detail. As long as you're not printing massive, then you're not gonna have any problems at all. It is a little bit on the slow side compared to newer cameras, but I actually kind of liked it. It was making me take a little bit extra time, which actually made me think a bit more about the kind of photos I was taking. So I know it's obviously a case of it being a little bit older, so it's a little bit slower, but I actually didn't mind that at all. I kind of expected it anyway, and it changed the way I was taking photos. It's obviously been improved upon, but for the price point it now sits at, it's a great option for street photography or an everyday camera or a travel camera. It's just a great camera, like I say before. For someone starting out photography, this would be a perfect starter. Now, of course, let's move on to the X100S. Now, this is a lovely camera as well. It has some pretty decent upgrades from the original X100. For starters, it just kind of feels nicer. Things like the lever on the front for the hybrid viewfinder has been reshaped, so it just feels nicer to actually use. It's also got a 16.3 megapixel sensor instead of 12.3, so there's a little bit more detail there on your shots. It gives you a little bit of room to crop in if you want to, but certainly the actual image quality, you know, there's a decent upgrade there, bit more detail, and no optical low pass filter, which means the images are a little bit sharper. Now, like I say, there's a number of quality of life improvements in this camera, which just make it feel better to shoot with. The menus were redesigned, the Q button has been added, and as you'd expect, the camera operates faster, including things like autofocus, which are actually noticeably quicker. It's still a great looking camera, you know, much like the original X100, I think it looks fantastic. I just love the look of this stuff. But it has those overall upgrades from the original X100 for image quality and the feel of the camera itself as well. And that brings us on to the X100T. Now, in some ways, it's a similar sort of camera to the S. It's the same resolution, obviously the same sort of design. You've obviously got that lever, that redesigned lever that you had on the S as well. But one of the biggest upgrades here is the screen. It's been increased in size. So it's a 3-inch LCD screen on the back, which means that if you don't want to be using the viewfinder, that screen is bigger. It's just easier to see, easier to navigate around the menus because you have more screen real estate. Fujifilm also added classic chrome film simulation and face recognition AF, which means things like street photography if you're trying to nail a particular subject, or indeed portrait or anything like that. it's just a bit easier with the face recognition. There's also the option of using an electronic shutter to have a silent mode for your photography. So things like street photography, if you're trying to be discreet, are going to be a little bit easier using this camera. And then finally, of course, we have the X100F. Now, this is a really lovely camera. It actually feels very, very modern to use. Of course, it's not that old really, but it does feel great. You know, it's same sort of design, but there's some really quite decent upgrades here. So of course, we've got the 24.3 megapixel sensor. So really quite a good increase in detail here. And that brings it up to pretty much on par with what you'd expect from a better camera, you know, from a higher resolution camera. That's a good resolution to get a good amount of detail. You can certainly do some cropping if you want to, but you're gonna get nice, highly detailed photos. It's also got a faster X Processor Pro processor, making the camera just feel a lot faster, just in terms of navigating menus, in terms of actually operating the camera. Autofocus as well just feels a lot faster. And speaking about that, there are just other quality of life improvements here, like a new button layout with a joystick, which makes the autofocus control so much easier, a built-in ISO dial, which makes manual shooting much easier as well, because you've got all of the controls right at your fingertips. Of course, the aperture control around the lens here. Of course, you've got the shutter speed dial just right up there, and then you can just pull that up and turn to actually do the ISO. So it's all very easy to actually access. So for manual shooting, I think it's much easier. I think ergonomically, I think design-wise, I think operation-wise, just much easier to use. It's also got a larger battery, which means of course you can shoot for longer, and an improved 91-point AF system. Of course, it's worth mentioning as well, the EVF has been improved here. It just looks better. You know, it's nicer to look through, nicer to shoot with, which just again helps adding to that kind of better shooting experience. The X100F brought in some really particularly great improvements, most notably to the sensor and the autofocus, and it feels like a great companion camera for any photographer. Of course, there's now the X100V as well, and like I said at the beginning of the video, I will link to our video review of that down in the description so you can go and check that out. I'll of course pop links to all of these cameras down in the description as well. We've got them all in our used department as well. So it's definitely worth going and check that out, because they are a great option for someone wanting to get a camera who doesn't want to have to deal with interchangeable lenses, wants something. I mean, I was speaking to a friend actually about this the other day. It's a perfect camera for someone who doesn't want to have to deal with that. They don't want a camera bag. You know, they just want a good camera that they can take good photos with, and they can just have it in their ordinary bag when they go out, when they go traveling, when they go out every day. They can just have it with them. And if they want to take some snaps, they can. The sensor is big enough that, of course, it's a 35mm lens equivalent, but you can crop in if you need to get a little bit closer. It's f2, which means it's really quite nice and bright. It's quite a fast lens. You can get a little bit of bokeh in there as well. Just a really, really all-round great option. If you do have any questions about any of the cameras you've seen in the video, of course, pop them down in the comments. Any thoughts as well? Anyone who's got any thoughts about any of the X100 cameras, pop them down in the comments as well, because I love hearing all about that. If you like the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. That always helps us out. Make sure to subscribe as well, because we've got new stuff coming all the time. Woo! Tutorials, reviews, Throwback Thursday. Who knows what else might be coming? Something new? Maybe. I will, of course, see you in the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.